My name is Fifi Peters, and I'm really happy to be here with you today talking about one of the most beautiful continents in the world, in my view. I know this because I'm from there, and I feel like I have a privilege to be from there, and that, of course, is Africa. And I'd like to begin the session with a quote. It is believed to have come from the Japanese admiral who planned the attack on Pearl Harbor. It was a surprise invasion, of course, for the US back in 1941. And the gentleman who I would like to quote, Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, is reported to have written in his diary that, "I fear all we have done is to awaken a sleeping giant and fill him with a terrible resolve." Of course, this was after the successful retaliation of the US to the surprise attack from Japan. And I reference the sleeping giant because quite often Africa is considered and described as a sleeping giant. It's a continent with incredible potential, incredible targets that it can achieve in terms of the economies and also for its people, but it's not rising up to that occasion, in my view, as yet, and I am really open to hearing your particular perspectives in this regard. Now, we're here to reflect on one of the tools that can help the continent to do exactly that. That is the Africa Free Trade Continental Area Deal. It's one of the most promising tools, we are told, to help this giant rise to the occasion. This giant that is on snooze, and I don't know how your wake-up patterns are. I'm a serial snoozer. It takes about 4 or 5 rings or so, but it seems as though those rings are still going on in terms of what the African continent is doing right now. So the purpose of this morning's conversation is to pick up on where we are in awakening the sleeping giant. We'll be delving quite deeply into policy that can do a lot better. We'll be diving quite deeply into what governments can do more of to ensure it happens, and of course the critical role that the private sector can continue to play to ensure that we can ultimately scale the economy, the continent that is Africa. So allow me to introduce you to the speakers who are joining me on stage at this moment in time, and I'll begin with the lady on my immediate left, that is, Ms. Mary Vilakazi. She is the Chief Executive Officer Designate of First Rand South Africa, the largest lender on the African continent by a market value. Could we welcome her with a warm applause? And the gentleman who is looking at me right now, His Excellency Wamkele Mene. He's the Secretary General, of course, of the African Continental Free Trade Area Secretariat. Needs no introduction, but I just did it anyway, so welcome, sir.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
We also have with us Ms. Fernanda Lopez-Lassen, Executive Vice President for Africa and Asia, Yara International, based in Singapore. Welcome, Ms. Lassen.
Thank you.
And just that traffic challenge that I was talking about, we are waiting, or perhaps we are being joined in, oh, it's not him. Hello, sir. Hi, Minister. We are awaiting His Excellency Kashim Shettima, the Vice President of Nigeria, and I am told that he will be joining shortly. But to get the discussion going in any case, Mr. Men, I'd like to begin with you, sir. It is a new year, perfect time to set new targets of what one wants to achieve. And I just would like to understand from you, as the picture looks like right now, where do things stand in terms of the AFCFTA, and what are your 2024 targets, sir?
Well, thank you very much. First, let me, if I may, pick up on the point you made about the continent of Africa and the potential. In the year 2000, The Economist, I think all of us remember this, The Economist had on the front cover a map of the African continent, and it said the continent of darkness. I think they have tried to redeem themselves since then, The Economist, that is, but what they were projecting is exactly the opposite of what you and I believe. And that is the enormous potential that the African continent has. Of course, the over the last 70 years, that potential has not been unleashed. And with the establishment of the AFCFTA, 47 countries who have ratified it, creating a market of 1.4 billion people with a combined GDP that is projected by 2035 to be $16.2 trillion. It's quite significant.
Sure.
So the continent has the opportunity to be the 7th or the 8th largest economy in the world in less than 20 years. Over the last, since 2020, since the operationalization of the AFCFTA, as I've just mentioned, 47 countries have ratified the agreement. We have seen the start of trading in earnest, goods moving across borders. Of course, not the same volumes that we would like to see because it is early stages. But nonetheless, we have developed the rules and the legal construct that enables a single market to be effective and through the private sector participation. We launched the Pan-African Payments and Settlement System to enable payments. As you know, if you are in Ghana, where I live, you want to trade with another African in Kenya, you have to buy a third currency. And that cost of currency convertibility constrains growth in Africa. So this year, our intention is to accelerate the implementation of the AFCFTA. Last year, we had 7 countries that took part in a pilot of trading under the rules of the AFCFTA. This year, there will be 31 countries who will be participating in the Guided Trade Initiative, applying the rules, the preferential rules of the AFCFTA for trade.
Okay, can I jump in there, because clearly that pilot went really, really well. Maybe if you can just give us a picture of what the actual targets that were met by that pilot, such that you've even been able to entice a whole lot more countries to be a part of it for this year.
Well, to give you an example, we have an exporter, a manufacturer of ceramic tiles in Ghana who's exporting them to Cameroon. And before the AFCFTA, that exporter was exporting, trading on the basis of global rules. So no competitiveness. The AFCFTA enabled 20% reduction in duty. That is 20% competitiveness as of the start of trade. The products that were traded ranged from processed agricultural products to manufactured goods to services also. The lessons that we learned is that actually the private sector is ready. Governments have to move much faster, but private sector across the continent is ready to take advantage of the AFCFTA. You take Uganda, for example. Uganda has 2 billion liters of milk, excess milk a year. They have begun trading and exporting their milk from Uganda to Algeria, when Algeria was importing their milk from another part of the world, from Latin America. So these are the steps that are being taken by countries to enhance and boost intra-Africa trade.
Okay.
This year, the intensified effort will be on the services sector. So tourism sector, banking sector, within the framework of this pilot, this guided trade initiative that we want to see, and the enabling tools. And I'll mention just 2 of those enabling tools. One is the Pan-African Payments and Settlement System, as I mentioned, to enable payments in local currency, to reduce the cost, to reduce the barriers to trade. And then second, soon the Ministers of Trade will conclude the protocol on digital trade, which will further enhance competitiveness of Africa's economy. And as we all know, this is where Africa has an advantage in digital innovations. And so the protocol will harness that potential and provide that regulatory framework, the market access, to enable Africa's digital economy to continue to power ahead.
Okay. I'll just also use this moment to extend a point that Mr. Mena was making about the focus for this year, of course, being on looking at trade and services. But you were talking about milk, and so I'll stick in the agricultural lane if we can. Ms. Fernanda, just in terms of the work that Yara is doing, and perhaps even reflecting on some of the feedback from Mr. Mena about the AFCFTA so far. Just talk to us about your broad thinking of it, but ultimately the importance of agriculture from Yara. We know it's really important in terms of the jobs opportunity, also the contribution to GDP, but towards sustainable development and how you're seeing it being affected a lot better.
Absolutely. First of all, I wanted to build a bit on the analogy or on the saying that you said about waking up the giant, right? So I am Brazilian, born and raised, obviously of African heritage as well. And I grew up seeing my country also being referred as a giant that never wake up, that has so much potential. But I think if there's one area where Brazil really woke up and got it really right is agriculture. So, and I see those same opportunities, that same potential for Africa as well. So the same passion that I have for my country, I have for trying to transform and trying to transition African agriculture, of course, through my company, to a more sustainable way. So the sector is predominantly made up of smallholder farmers, right? And with that, it comes a myriad of challenges. Fertilizer application rate being one of them, because that's an obvious one that we deal with in my company. So just to give you an idea, today per acre, Africa applies 5 to 6 times less fertilizer than the global average rates. So this, of course, has a consequence not only in yield, but in over-mining of nutrients from the soil, acidification, and that, of course, carries negative repercussions for a long time. But of course, just increasing fertilization is not enough. So we need to find ways to increase yield, but in a much more sustainable way. So we need to focus much more on nutrients rather than just over fertilizing soils. Every nutrient count. Today, again, a smallholder farmer in Africa is not applying more than 2 nutrients, and that is not enough, right? So we need to tailor-make solutions for farmers. Like we did in Yara by developing something specifically for maize farmers that gives them at least 4 to 5 nutrients in a pricing point that they can actually afford. So there are many things that we can do, but it's not only about products; it's also about the farmers themselves. So it's about this knowledge gap that still exists in African agriculture today. So how do we move them to learning more about new practices, regenerative practices, right? So today a farmer is still practicing agriculture like his parents or her parents, grandparents. So there is a paradigm shift that we need to do here. Teaching farmers how to grow, but also mitigate emissions at the same time, have better soil management practices, better resource efficiency, not only nutrients, but water. I mean, it is a rain-fed agriculture, so we need to find better ways for them to use water, which is a scarce resource, and at the same time protecting also biodiversity.
Sure.
So I think,
can I hit pause on that for a second? We are now being joined by His Excellency Shatima.
Vice President, how are you? Good.
Oops.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Better late than never.
Yes.
We forgive you. We understand the traffic constraints.
I actually went to the other end. I had to walk down.
The other end, oh dear.
Yes.
Which one of the team members briefed you that way? So let me deal with it. Fernanda, you were talking there, if you're able to just pick up where you left off.
Absolutely. No, just concluding. So I think it's all that we do, however, needs to lead to better livelihoods for farmers. So if farmers are not winning, then we are not winning. Then we are all losing.
Sure. Can I ask you also to reflect on what Mr. Mena said, just this tool or perhaps this innovation that the continent is really excited about right now, this system that essentially removes the middleman or the middle currency and allows countries to transact without the added layer of the conversion into the third currency, as it were. What's the experience of perhaps maybe some of your farmers, or what do you think the potential of that could be as you look down the line in terms of increasing the level of trade, particularly within agriculture?
I think if that comes to fully to fruition and to life, I think will be absolutely amazing for the farmers. As I mentioned, if the farmers win, then we all win. I think one of the key issues that farmers in Africa also face today is, as you said, is this middleman who, acts as an intermediary, and in the end, right, let's say the profits don't necessarily stay, right, with the farmers as they should. We also see issues around difficulties for lending. Although the financial system today is not really super geared up for smallholder farmers. So I think if we find solutions to improve lending or insurance for smallholder farmers, I think those things will come a long way into resolving many of those issues. I was in a session yesterday, and I found that super interesting. Someone came up with this idea of when farmers are trying to raise funds, they put their land as collateral, right? So why don't we design a system where, if we can prove that these farmers are using regenerative practices in their agriculture, so suddenly the value of their assets will go up. So if we have a house, if we build an extra room, 2 rooms, the value of the asset will go up, right? So why is that not the same for farmers when they're actually using practices that are better for nature? So I think there are several things that we can do to help them on that regard.
Okay. Your Excellency, so just to bring you in, so we've been talking about scaling the continent, as you know, just how to really get Africa to punch above its weight, as we know that it does have the potential to do. And I suppose you cannot have a conversation about that without having a conversation about Nigeria and its role, and its potential, and the opportunity also that it presents. So perhaps your broad level views on this topic of scaling Africa, and particularly your experience of Nigerian commerce in participating under the AFCFTA so far, sir.
Thank you so much. Well, the next frontier, the next global frontier is Africa. And I can assure you that as the trajectory of global growth moves towards Africa, Nigeria will certainly play a very pivotal role. If Nigeria walks, Africa walks. 1 out of every 4 black men is a Nigerian. And the story of Nigerian goes beyond the fraudsters in Europe and America. No. The fastest growing immigrant community in the United States are the Nigerian Americans. Going beyond that, Africa holds tremendous potential. As my sister rightly captured, entrepreneurial capitalism is embedded in the very psyche of the average African. But what we are lacking is the resources to put our people in Jeffrey Sachs' ladder of development. She rightly captured the mood and the requirements. Agriculture holds the key, but we are in some sort of a time capsule. 100 years ago, our forefathers were using horse and cutlasses to eke out a meager existence. Now we have to embrace modern agricultural practices, regenerative agricultural practices, fertilization, tractorization, intermediate, not the advanced tractorization that is embedded in Europe and the Americas. And there will be, the whole mantra is on increase in yield, so that Africa will be in a position to fit itself and add value to the world. Our combined GDP is expected to be about $3.4 trillion with a market of 1.3 billion people. And the beauty of the African continent, besides the tremendous natural resource endowments, the most important of our endowments are the human resource component. We are the youngest continent in the world. For instance, Nigeria, the average age of the Nigerian population is 19. And this huge youth bulge, we can truly transform them into demographic dividends. I'm afraid I'm an eternal optimist. I don't want to see it as a demographic disaster that will consume all of us. Because once we wear our thinking caps as leaders, once we reach out to the global community for partnership, I believe that Africa stands poised to be a driver of change and growth in the world. According to Korn Ferry, a global consultancy outfit, by 2035, there will be 65 million global talent deficit. The United States will suffer from 6 million, Brazil, 6 million, Russia, 6 million, even India, the global capital of outsourcing, will only have 1 million talent surplus. And nations like Nigeria, Egypt, generally the African continent, we are in a position to really take advantage of the digital revolution in the world. For instance, Nigeria, there are more English speakers in Nigeria than in India. Our proximity to Europe is an added advantage, and most importantly, even our diction. I will tell you a story of a young lady in Abuja. Her name is Mrs. Amal Hassan. She runs a digital lab, a digital outsourcing hub. This is a lady who has employed 7,000 Nigerians. This is just a tip of the iceberg. Opportunities abound in the outsourcing industry and in so many other development frontiers. India is expected to generate $100 billion from outsourcing alone in this 2024. Yes, we are an oil giant, but how much did we ever generate from oil? The highest we had ever generated as an oil-producing nation was 35 billion in 2011. So I believe that Africa holds the promise, and I want to use this platform to seek for partnership. For me, I don't subscribe to the idea of begging, no. We can carry our poverty with dignity.
Sure.
We can seek for partnership, for friendship, for genuine relationship that would be mutually beneficial to the investors as well as to the African people.
Sure. I agree with you, and Mary, I'm going to come to you in just a short while. I agree with you just in terms of the fact that, I mean, we don't have to beg, just given the fact that it can be a mutually beneficial exchange. If you look at the fact that we do house some of the most important assets that the world needs right now, from the minerals that we mine to power all forms of transitions, energy transitions, green transitions, to the workforce that you did mention, although perhaps a caveat can be placed as to whether the workforce is skilled to the same degree as in other parts of the world and is competitive as well to the same degree. That's perhaps something that we can park on the side. So we've got a lot of things going for us, essentially so. And it can be a mutually beneficial exchange. But what we have seen is we've seen a lot of money going away from us as well, in terms of the continent. Some money has been patient enough to actually just sit on the fence and wait and see for certain things to come right. Infrastructure, some of the challenges there, but perhaps even governance and concerns around how things are run and managed. Perhaps the biggest concern there. So in this exchange that you seek, this partnership exchange, sir, what is your message to some of the investors, from outside the continent who might be interested in what you're saying right now. The numbers that you've presented do look appealing, but they do, of course, still have their concerns.
Well, the concerns about leadership is quite germane because, as Chinua Achebe, one of Nigeria's foremost Nobelists, said, the problem of Africa is purely that of leadership. But there is a sea change in the quality of leadership prevailing in Africa now than it was 20, 30 years ago when the Mobutu Sese Sekos of this world were holding sway. For instance, in my country, we have a leader who is clearly poised to determine and redefine the quality of modern leadership. In the past 6 months since we assumed the mantle of leadership, he had taken far-sighted decisions, including the biggest elephant in the room, the withdrawal of oil fuel subsidy that was an albatross around the neck of successive Nigerian governments, the reform of the foreign exchange regime where we had multiple exchange rates, and beyond that, the setting up of a fiscal reform committee so that we can have a single line of taxation. There's a lot still that needs to be done, but be rest assured that in terms of leadership, there is a sea change in our fortunes now and in the past. At the risk of embarrassing him, seated here is our Minister of Finance and Coordinating Minister of the Economy. He's a humble and self-effacing gentleman, living in the same house for the past 30 years, which is quite unlike an African, pomposity and our preference for big things. He has been living in that
house.
Yes, in the same house, just a 3-bedroom house for the past 30 years.
Okay. If this is a mansion that was built 30 years ago and has been renovated, then perhaps.
And look at our Minister of Communications. He's a square peg in a square hole. He's a young man, apolitical. In fact, he was even critical of our candidature. But when my boss, when he sees people with contrarian views but have the capacity for value addition, he is in that digital ecosystem. He runs a lab, a digital lab in Lagos. He picked him. He's a young man. He's in his 30s. And gave him the mantle of leadership to drive the process of change in the communications industry. On infrastructure, certainly we have huge infrastructural deficit. But the word for crisis in the Chinese language is wei, des. Wei stands for danger and des for opportunity. Yes, those crises, those challenges also provide us with the opportunities to reposition our nations in terms of infrastructure. And this is why the investors can easily come in, especially with the enabling environment created by the present administration. I don't want to confine myself to Nigeria alone. Go to Ghana, go to South Africa, go to Egypt, go to Ethiopia, where Abiy Hassan is doing wonderfully well. So Africa is beckoning on the wall for genuine partnership that will really work for the mutual benefit of all of us.
Okay. And so Mary, comes in you as the largest lender on the continent by market value. So the decisions that you make are not emotional ones. It can't be like me because of passion and love for a continent. It needs to be decisions that are based on risk-weighted returns, as it were. And so just reflecting on what some of the colleagues have shared, but also as First Rand, what you're thinking and how you view the opportunity that is Africa right now. Just spell out that investment case for us.
Thank you, Fifi. It's been very encouraging listening to the comments from the Vice President from Nigeria. As First Rand, we have an investment and a business in Nigeria, so I think all the reforms that we've seen over the last 7 months have been encouraging, and I guess, as you say, that if when Nigeria does well, the continent does well. So we certainly also sit with an appreciation and would like to encourage you to see through all the structural reforms that have taken place over the last while. And Fifi, I guess when we have a discussion like this, you started off and spoke about this long-held promise around the continent, given the demographics, given all the resources that the continent has, and actually what's been delivered. But I think when one looks at the next 10 years, I certainly am encouraged that there are a lot of structural reforms that have been necessary over the last while that have not received as much attention as one can say they're receiving now, including, I guess, the development as well in a very big economy like Nigeria. You look at some of the structural reforms that are underway in South Africa. I mean, we're still one of the most industrialized countries on the continent, but we know the impacts of not having energy and what that has done to our economy. So, you know, there is a lot that one can look at and be encouraged around what the next 10 years will bring. And I think Mr. Minette just actually outlined a very critical action plan and developments that have taken place on an instrument that is really required. I mean, one way to lift the growth of any economy is really trade. And I guess the barriers to trade, Yeah, the barriers to trade have really been well captured, and actually that, and the opportunity that sits behind countries where we take away all those barriers. I mean, I guess if we just even look at regional trade, if we got that right, and I guess we enabled the opportunities that come about from regional trade, that already will be significant, let alone the continent. So I think just to the World Bank, encouragement to please keep on going with the reforms, and it's also just hearing the results of also what's taken place. I think it's quite significant. When we look at the numbers of how much the frictional cost of trade is on the continent, because as you said, people need to access currencies that they don't trade in. I think it's about $5 billion a year, which, you know, I think which actually could go back into the economies. And I mean, you made the point around lending. So some of the challenges that we see, and where as banks, we would like to leverage more of our balance sheet for productive capital formation. I know sometimes we get a lot of pressure for not lending, but, you know, I mean, retail lending is important if it enables a person to own a house and live in it for 3 decades. But, you know, for purpose of consumption, that's not particularly helpful. But I guess what we should really be, what we need to do with the deposits that our depositors entrust us with is convert that for productive capital formation. So we need to make sure that money is going into lending businesses that are going to create jobs. Businesses that are going to make sure that we've got the infrastructure required to generate the economic capital. So that's really where we would like to play. But when the policies and the regulations are not enabling, I think that becomes really a very big constraint. And I mean, I think just to go back to agriculture, so if you look at a lot of our economies, I mean, if you compare them globally, they are small, but they're quite complex. I mean, South Africa itself is also quite complex. And how that plays out when you look at small and emerging enterprises that are coming through that require finance is that there's a gap between there's a perception gap in terms of the risks that the businesses undertake and the actual risks. So the perception of risk is quite different. And I think, you know, leveraging off data, leveraging off, you know, I think a lot of the advances that have happened in technology, we are able to look at a small business and see that it's actually an important part of an ecosystem or a value chain. So in agriculture, for instance, you know, we can look at a milk bottle supplier, and instead of looking at the balance sheet of just that supplier, we can have a look at the value chain, and we can have a look at the ultimate dairy producer, and, you know, and enable finance for that small business that in the past, I think it was just harder to do. So there is an opportunity to do more. And so certainly, I think when we look at trade and we look at, you know, and we're able to see that the small business that sits in South Africa or in Zambia has more trading partners, and we are able to build the data that goes with that. There's certainly a lot more financing opportunities for some of the smaller businesses. So it's just really an illustration of some of the things that, banks, I think, have got the balance sheet, but then there is not really proper enablement, or that value chain of really what's possible is not unlocked. So that's something that's very encouraging for us. And then the theme of really trade and investments, I think that is really what will be a needle mover for the continent going forward. And as I said, Fifi, I think some of the structural reforms that are underway in South Africa on electricity, on the ports, I think that is, I think if those are sustained and there's political will, I think if you mentioned leadership, it goes really a long way in providing an environment where people can be confident around the decisions that they take for the next 10 years.
Okay, Mary, I want to pick up on the point that you are making around the enabling environment, if I may. So at CNBC Africa, my employer, I have the opportunity to speak to several ministers, some of which I've already spoken to, some of which I'm looking forward to an interview with. And you speak with these ministers, Mary, and a lot of them will tell you about what they have been doing in terms of creating this enabling environment. A lot of the government officials believe that the work that they are doing to create an enabling environment is sufficient. A lot of them are in this room right now. So perhaps maybe for the purpose of their understanding and clarity, what exactly do you mean? What does an enabling environment look like for FirstRand now to play a bigger role as a lender in helping to implement the AFCFTA?
So maybe let me start off and say that I think, and particularly from South Africa, I think we've seen improved levels of collaboration between the private sector and the public sector. I guess the initiatives that are currently underway, one can argue that we needed some crises to get us to where we are, but we are there. And there are initiatives where there's, this joint commitment from both the government and the private sector. And I think the private sector is doing a lot to ensure that, some of those deliverables are going to take place. So energy and the rail, and the transit issues being an example, and obviously we know crime and corruption is also, and safety are issues that are also quite important. So I am encouraged by the partnership, I am encouraged by the collaboration. I think there's opportunity to do more. Certainly from the private sector, we welcome any opportunity where we can lean in and I think be of assistance to, to enabling the state capacity. We know there are policy makers, so I think those lines are quite clearly well understood, but there is definitely an opportunity to do more. And I think at the top of mind, I suppose just, I think regulatory and policy certainty goes a long way. Mm-hmm. So, I think when there's agreement that this is the route and this is the path we're going, just seeing that through, and I think making sure, I think if we say that is our energy plan and that's what it looks like up until 2030, we must stay the course, because if there's something else that comes along the line, I think it causes unnecessary confusion, and I think it really impacts people's ability to invest. So policy certainty would be one. I mean, we've spoken a lot about the fact that, I guess we sit with high levels of unemployment on the continent, but we also need skills. And we need skills to be able to move around the various countries in the region. So I think, just enabling businesses that require the skills at that particular point in time to get access to the skills remains quite key. And I guess that's broader than South Africa, that's just looking really at the region. And then I think the last one is really, for me, confidence. So if you hear from the people that are in the startups, you hear about the talent that exists on the continent, all the initiatives around artificial intelligence, tech skills, those are all there. But what's not there is actually the investment to make sure that the development takes place in the country. It's quite saddening when you hear around the people that are leaving to go to Canada or that are being recruited elsewhere, where the investment has taken place to get them all skilled up, but now when they become really skilled tech people, then they leave the continent because there isn't sufficient investment coming through there. So I think, those would be the three critical ones that I would point out. today really just being just the certainty around policy, enabling the mobility of people, and I think of skills in the continent, and then just the confidence, which is, again, we live up to the promises and up to what our stakeholders require to ensure that they can put in the investment required in the continent. I mean, I think, we have capital markets that require a lot of flows to come into the continent to enable us to do the work required for infrastructure development, and I think to make sure that many of the people living on the continent have access to a good standard of living. So I think just making sure that at any given point in time, we are really an investment case on all fronts.
Okay. I'm going to open it up to the floor, to audience members right now, and just want to solicit your views on how we do this building this economy of scale. What are your thoughts? If you can just indicate your level to express by raising your hand, keeping it brief, of course. But yes, so do we have some mics in the room? And I see you too. Oh, right.
Okay, I'll try and speak loud. I would want to hear a bit more details from Brazil. I think you talked about the parallels with Africa, potential, the geography, and so forth. And you mentioned some of the things that have happened to unlock this agricultural giant. You mentioned fertilizer, you mentioned better seeds and so forth. I'm not sure whether those were the most fundamental push that transformed Brazil. If not, could you please elaborate a little bit more on the most critical factors that led to this big jump? Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you for the question. I guess to fully explore it, we will almost need another session, and we don't have that time.
We've got 2 minutes, apparently. I don't know how quickly that time is.
Exactly. But I would say, just in the sake of time, 2 very, very important things. First was government vision, right? So you have to want to do it and put all wheels in motion to make it happen. It is a major contributor to Brazil's economy. And the government was, and I'm not talking current government, agriculture has been growing in Brazil for, decades and decades, but it was a very clear vision about going and seeking that growth, and technology and science. So a lot of money is invested in scientific knowledge in Brazil when it comes to agriculture. So to take also leading positions in some of the key crops in the world. There are many other factors, but I would say those 2 were absolutely fundamental.
To all of you, unfortunately, we have to cut this conversation right now. Thank you so much for your participation and for your time.